What if every choice you made was never yours, and every loss was planned long before you felt it? What if the quiet hands that shaped your fear were not in a grave or a legend, but in the air around you, tugging at you like thin strings you cannot see? Listen closely. The town still creaks at night. The wind still carries names, and in the dark between one breath and the next, something smiles. You remember how it started, because the beginning never stops happening here. A gate that would not stay closed. A dog that barked at a corner where no one stood. A bell that rang at 13 past 13, though no clock was wired to do that. People said it was an old place with old sounds, but the sounds kept learning our names. The first missing person was not the first one taken. She was just the first one we were brave enough to count. Before her, we called it a long walk or a new job or a bad marriage. We told each other neat lies, because neat lies are soft. Then the chapel burned even though the candles were all out, and the smell of smoke clung to our clothes for weeks. As if it had picked us, as if fire had a memory, and that memory was us. We said it was an accident. We nodded and moved on. But our eyes did not move on. They stayed on the ash line around the old stone. On the way the stone looked like a jaw. And the jaw looked like it could bite. The symbols came next. And of course, we blamed children. Children like to draw. Children like to scare. But the circles were too exact and the lines were too thin and the shapes matched old survey marks from a map that was never meant to be found. They appeared on doors, on school desks, on the inside of a bus window where only breath could reach. When you wiped them away, they came back sharper, like someone had traced your hand, tracing them. Then the mayor made his speech, the one where he promised to bring order back. The microphone cut in and out, but not at random. It cut out on certain words: truth, safety, trust, as if the cable chewed those sounds and spat them under the stage. That night he left town. That morning his house was clean. Too clean, like a room in a museum. Like a scene set up to teach us a lesson we did not want. We tried to hold meetings. We spoke in circles. We said, it's a prank. We said, it's a gas leak. We said, it's grief. But the stories from the edge of town would not bend to those answers. A truck rolled uphill with no engine. A swing moved while the tree was still. A mother swore she saw her son walk in two places at once. At the sink, washing his hands. At the hallway mirror, watching himself wash his hands. The boy said he felt fine, but the mirror fogged in the shape of a hand that was not his size. There was a diary, too, found under loose floorboards in the old mill. The paper was damp and the ink had bled, but one line held, like a thread through rot. He said the town was his stage, and we were the show. We argued about the he. We circled old names and new suspects. We forgot to ask why the stage lights were always on, even when the power flickered out on every street but one. Then came the night of the puppets. We do not like to say that word, because it makes the rest too easy to believe. But you asked for the truth, and the truth is not kind. In the basement below the mill there were figures made from rags and wire. Not dolls, not art. Each one wore a tag, and each tag had a date that matched a day when the town turned the other way. They looked like the missing. They also looked like the ones who never left. One of them looked like you, not in the face that was blank but in the way the shoulder slumped. The way the thread at the wrist had split as if from reaching toward a door that would not open. Someone coughed, and all the rags swayed at once, though there was no wind. We backed up the steps in a line, and the line felt tight at our chests, as if something had tied us together so we could be pulled together. Or cut together, with one motion. By then, ghost was not a story. It was a word we used when we needed a word that fit in our mouths. It let us talk without naming ourselves. We blamed ghost for the car that started itself, for the river that flowed backward under the bridge, for the letters that showed up in our mailboxes with no stamps and no return. Just a short note in a hand we almost knew, you were chosen for this part. We told each other it was a prank. We told ourselves it was fate. But late at night we heard tiny clicks, like wooden joints learning how to move. And we felt a soft tug behind our thoughts, and we woke with the taste of dust and string on our tongues. The idea rose slow and cold. What if ghosts did not haunt the town? What if ghosts planned the town? What if the map was a diagram, and the streets were lines drawn for us to follow, and every turn we took only led us deeper into the hand that drew them? If that is true, then every promise, every kiss, every goodbye we spoke was delivered on a cue we never saw. And if that is true, then the only way out is not out at all. It is through, to the center where the strings meet. That is where the knots live. That is where the answers wait, still and patient, like a smile in the dark. The town tried to wake up, but waking means remembering, and remembering hurts. After the puppets were found, Everyone stopped speaking in full sentences. Words became short. Safe things, fine, busy, soon. Even the dogs barked softer, as if afraid of saying too much. The mayor's empty house stood like a tooth pulled from a jaw, bleeding silence into every street. The windows of the old mill were boarded up, but some nights the boards glowed faintly, pulsing like veins. People said it was the moonlight. People said it was bad wood. People said anything that helped them sleep. But no one slept right anymore. Dreams came in static flashes, faces stitched together. Rooms folding in on themselves. The feeling of being watched not by eyes, but by thought. One by one, the lights in town began to flicker out. The power company said it was a grid issue, though no one had called for repairs. In the dark, voices slipped through the wires. Not screams, not words, something between breathing and laughter. Radios turned themselves on at 3:03 every night, whispering the same phrase through white noise. You're doing well. Don't stop the act. The first few who heard it ran to their neighbors, swearing they were being toyed with, but when the neighbors came, the radios went dead, and the houses smelled faintly of rust and salt. They stopped talking about it. That was the start of the quiet rule. If you don't name it, it can't find you. But it always found you. Just slower. Then the historian came back. He'd left years ago, before the disappearances, when the air was still light. He returned with maps, rolled tight, skin pale as paper. He said he'd followed the town's layout on a larger scale, copied it onto tracing sheets, expanded it, aligned it with old mining blueprints. He looked sick when he showed what he found. Every street, every alley, every house foundation formed part of a symbol, the same symbol carved into those school desks, the same one we wiped off the bus window. The town was a sigil, a giant hand-drawn invocation, not random, built that way, brick by brick. His voice broke when he said it. Someone designed this. Someone made us live in a pattern. He didn't stay the night. He left his car running by the gas station, the engine humming with no one inside. After that, things began to repeat. Whole days replayed themselves with tiny differences. The same conversations, the same sunrises. But the sky tilted a little too far east, and the birds flew in figure eights instead of lines. A girl dropped her mirror and it shattered. But when she bent to pick it up, her reflection moved before she did. Another boy tried to record the radio whisper, but every time he pressed play, the voice called him by a different name. The newspaper kept printing the same headline. Town meeting set for Thursday. But Thursday never came. The calendar stopped turning, and no one noticed right away, because the clocks still worked. And the human brain can live a long time pretending. They began to sense it then. That maybe Ghost wasn't in the shadows at all. Maybe Ghost was the repetition, the pattern itself. Maybe ghosts lived in the rhythm of our fear. When someone laughed too loud, the wind answered. When someone cried, windows fogged in sympathy. It was as if the town was listening and learning, becoming something bigger than stone and dust. And then came the letters again, this time folded into paper birds. They landed on porches and windowsills. The writing inside was different for everyone, but each letter ended the same way. The performance must continue. We wanted to burn the letters, but fire wouldn't take them. We tried tearing them, but the paper stitched itself back together when we blinked. Some said it was a test. Some said we had died long ago, and this was punishment, looping forever. But the truth felt simpler and worse. Ghost was not haunting us, it was rehearsing us, training us to play parts we'd already agreed to without knowing. Every gesture, every word, every heartbeat was choreography. The town wasn't cursed, it was directed. And somewhere, deep beneath the ground, something was pulling the strings with a patience older than time. You could feel it when the wind stopped mid-gust, or when you caught your own voice echoing back a second too soon. The air itself seemed to breathe differently, as if syncing to a pulse not human. You'd walk home, thinking of nothing, only to find footprints beside yours, perfectly aligned, like a twin walking just half a second behind. You'd tell yourself it was coincidence, but coincidence is the favorite disguise of control. Now, no one says the word ghost out loud. It's too heavy. It sticks to the tongue. We whisper, instead, the hand, the curtain, the thing that moves us. We look at the strings above the stage and pretend not to see them tremble. But deep down, we know the truth. We are not surviving the haunting, we are performing it. And Ghost, whoever or whatever it is, never needed to scare us. It only needed to make us act. Morning came, though it did not feel like morning anymore. The sun rose from the wrong place, slow and uncertain, its light bending across the town as if afraid to touch it. The streets were quiet, but not empty. Windows opened and closed without hands, and the air smelled faintly of iron and rain. No birds sang, No footsteps echoed, only that strange low hum that had begun weeks before, steady, pulsing, almost like breathing. The people had stopped asking questions by then. Asking was dangerous. Answers had started answering back. Still, there were always a few who couldn't let go of curiosity. And in Ghost Town, curiosity was a kind of curse. They gathered at the library that no one visited anymore. Dust lay thick as velvet on the shelves, and the old clock above the door was frozen at midnight. They called themselves the listeners. They were tired of running, tired of pretending the world hadn't gone crooked. One of them, Mara, brought a map drawn by the historian who had vanished. She laid it flat on the table, and when they looked closely, the streets formed a spiral, a perfect curve, leading inward, to a blank space at the center where no building stood. That space was labeled only with a word, source. They decided they would go there, not to escape, but to understand, because once you've lived this long in fear, understanding becomes the only kind of peace left. They walked through the spiral streets, and the deeper they went, the quieter the town became. Every step seemed to erase a sound, first their own breathing, then the wind, then the faint hum of electricity that had always haunted the nights. By the time they reached the empty square at the center, silence was complete. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that presses on your ears until it feels like your skull might crack. The ground there was smooth stone, and beneath it, faint patterns gleamed when the light hit them, lines, like veins or circuits, all leading toward a round hatch in the middle. Mara touched it. It was warm. The hatch opened easily, as if it had been waiting. Stale air rose up, thick and cold, smelling of oil and dust. The listeners descended a metal ladder into darkness. The walls below were lined with mirrors, but the reflections didn't match. In some, they saw themselves smiling when they weren't. In others, they were gone entirely. At the bottom, they found a vast chamber filled with hundreds of marionettes hanging from the ceiling. Each one moved faintly, swaying, though no wind stirred. The puppets had faces, human faces, each one carved with eerie precision, as if molded from memory. One puppet, near the center, looked exactly like Mara. Her knees buckled. On the far wall, a massive machine stood half buried in shadow. Its surface shimmered like glass and metal fused together. Strings from the ceiling ran down into it, disappearing through cracks that pulsed with dim light. The machine wasn't humming. It was whispering. Not in words, but in rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats, like a code or a heartbeat trying to speak. Mara stepped closer and realized that the whispers matched the sound she'd been hearing in her sleep for weeks. She reached out a hand. The machine responded not to her touch, but to her thought. Images flickered across its surface. Scenes from her life. From everyone's life. Replayed as if recorded through invisible eyes. Then a face appeared, not human, not ghost, but something between, woven from light and dust. It spoke without sound. The words didn't travel through the air. They bloomed directly inside her mind. "We built this. You continued it." Mara stumbled backward, but the others didn't move. Their eyes had gone pale, reflecting the machine's light. The voice continued. "Fear makes the best design. You gave it life. We only gave it shape." It showed them more: the founding of the town, the false maps, the mayor's speeches, all of it scripted, rehearsed. Ghost wasn't a person. Ghost was the town itself, an old experiment in belief and control. Someone, long ago, had built it to test how far human minds would bend when fed fear and repetition. But the experiment had outgrown its creators. The pattern had learned to continue on its own. Mara screamed, but no sound left her throat. The voice wrapped around her thoughts. "You wanted meaning. We gave you strings." The strings above began to move faster, jerking the puppets in rhythm. The others swayed, caught in the motion. The mirrors around the room flickered, showing the same movements, hundreds of reflections dancing in sync. Mara tried to run, but her legs refused. She looked down and saw a thin white thread wound tight around her wrist, leading upward into the dark. The machine pulsed once, bright and blinding. When she awoke, she was standing in her own kitchen. Morning light spilled through the window, normal and kind. The town looked peaceful again. Birds sang. The radio played music instead of whispers. For a moment, she thought it was a dream. But then she saw her reflection in the glass, her mouth smiling while she stood perfectly still. A faint sound echoed behind her eyes. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. The machine's rhythm, still inside her. She touched her wrist. The skin was smooth, but beneath it, something pulsed like a string being plucked. The town had gone quiet again, but it was not the silence of safety. It was the silence of obedience. And somewhere, deep under the stone square, the machine waited, patient, humming softly, because Ghost did not need to control everyone anymore. It had taught them to control themselves. By the time the next dawn arrived, the town had forgotten what noise was. Doors no longer creaked. The river no longer murmured. Even the wind seemed to glide silently, as if it too feared breaking the stillness. But the silence wasn't empty, it was full, heavy, like the air before a storm that never comes. People moved through their routines with eyes that blinked too slowly, smiles that hung too long. The baker still opened his shop, but no scent of bread escaped. The postman still delivered letters, but no one remembered what was written inside them. Everything functioned, but nothing lived. Mara walked among them. Or at least the part of her that still thought it was Mara did. The rest, the quiet pulse in her wrist, the faint hum behind her thoughts, belonged to something else now. She could feel it when she tried to remember. Her memory slid sideways, blending with others that weren't hers. She saw herself as a child, standing in streets that hadn't been built yet. She saw the mayor writing in a book made of thin metal pages, whispering to it like it could hear. She saw the old historian drawing the spiral, over and over, until his hands bled, smiling because he finally understood what the town was meant to be. All their thoughts were linked, connected through invisible lines of will. Ghost wasn't above them anymore. It was through them, woven into every heartbeat. The machine beneath the square had gone quiet, but its silence had changed things. It had moved from metal to mind. Every thought was now a thread, and every thread was being tuned. People began to speak the same sentences without realizing it. "It's a good day," they would say in perfect unison, even when clouds covered the sky. They nodded to the same rhythm, paused at the same moments, as if reading from an unseen script. Children played games with rules no one had taught them, games that spelled out words when seen from above. No one noticed the pattern forming because no one looked up anymore. Then the lights began to return, but not the soft glow of the past. These lights came from inside the houses, pulsing faintly beneath the floors, rising through the cracks, like veins of gold under skin. The sound came next, a gentle ticking that matched the pulse in Mara's wrist. It wasn't random. It was counting. Something was preparing. The listeners were gone, their houses stripped bare, their names erased from the town records. In their place stood new buildings, perfect replicas of old ones, but cleaner, sharper, as if drawn by an architect with no memory of dust or decay. The town was rebuilding itself, piece by piece, erasing mistakes, redrawing its lines. And then came the rehearsal. The town began to move in cycles again. Every morning at exactly 6, the same fog rolled in. Every afternoon, a train whistle sounded from tracks that hadn't existed in decades. At 7, everyone froze for 13 seconds, as if waiting for a cue. And then they moved again, smiling. No one questioned it. The performance had begun. But it wasn't a show for them, it was a show of them. Somewhere far away, or maybe deep below, someone or something was watching, taking notes, adjusting the rhythm. The strings hummed softly in the sky, and the town glowed like a lantern in the dark. Mara tried once more to resist. She went to the mirror in her home and whispered her own name over and over, hoping it would anchor her. The reflection watched silently, lips unmoving. Then it smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. "Names are only props," it said in her voice. "You gave yourself to the story when you kept listening." The glass rippled, and for a moment she saw dozens of faces behind her own faces of everyone who had lived and vanished here. They were all part of it now, woven into the same endless narrative. That night, she dreamt of the machine again, but it looked different, organic, breathing, alive. Its strings were veins now, reaching out across the earth. Each thread connected to